Season of the Deep brought along some new perks for us to try, as new seasons usually do. I've made videos in the past covering perks that I think are possibly great, but today I wanted to switch it up a bit. Instead of covering one perk, I wanted to cover all 6 new perks at once. I'll cover each perk one at a time, explain what it does, what weapons it rolls on, showcase the perk in action, and decide if it's worth it or not. If you want to skip to a certain perk, you can find the timestamp in the description below. With that being said, let's hop into the video. Let's open up with the perk that had my most attention at the start of the season, Bipod. Bipod is an updated version of the popular Destiny 1 perk Tripod, which as it does in Destiny 2, rolled exclusively on rocket launchers. Bipod in Destiny 2 makes it to where your rocket launcher magazine capacity is doubled, while also providing additional reserves, but reduces blast radius, reload speed, and damage. I did some testing with this rocket to see just how much more ammo you got and also how much damage you lost, and it's pretty staggering. On the Apex Predator, which is the only rocket that is currently available that rolls Bipod, it takes your overall amount of rockets from 7 without reserve mods onto 12 without reserve mods, which sounds great until you realize you are applying a 40% damage reduction to your weapon because of this. I tested it against Bait and Switch, which I believe to be the best perk on Apex Predator, and Bait and Switch outdamaged Bipod by a little over 50,000 damage, which is the equivalent of roughly 2 Bipod rockets. Even though Bipod can give you an eye-watering amount of rockets, it sadly takes too much away for me to comfortably recommend this perk to anyone. Sadly, Bipod is not good, and it most certainly is not worth it. The next perk we have to discuss is Collective Action. Collective Action grants you a 20% increased damage for 7 seconds by picking up an elemental pickup like Fire Sprites, Void Breaches, Stasis Shards, Ionic Traces, and more. The duration of this buff can also be extended, with the maximum amount of this time this buff will be active reaching 12 seconds, which is pretty nice. I find this perk to be okay at best in PvE, but I prefer perks like Frenzy or Rampage in PvE for damage, and if I'm using that weapon for a build, I typically find a weapon that has a perk that can pair nicely with that build, like Incandescent, Volt Shot, and more. However, I find this perk to be really useful in PvP, especially if you play with either one of the 2 Darkness subclasses. If you pair this perk with the targeted redaction 120 RPM hand cannon, then you can 2-tap Guardians, and thanks to this perk now requiring a lot of work to proc, that 2-tap potential is very possible, for better or for worse. Overall, I'd say Collective Action is definitely a perk to keep your eye out on when you're grinding those weapons in Destiny, especially the targeted redaction. Next up, we have Controlled Burst. Controlled Burst is a fusion rifle exclusive perk, which currently only rolls on the Techian Force Last Wish fusion rifle. Controlled Burst grants your fusion rifle increased damage and reduced charge time every time you land every bolt from your fusion rifle on a target, with the timer being refreshed if you land a perfect shot again. The damage that you get from your next shot is roughly 20%, although I'm not sure on the exact reduction of the charge time, although I will say it's not too noticeable. I find this perk to be basically useless in PvP, as getting a perfect shot is very difficult to do, and you will only have 2 seconds to use your buffed shot, so I find this perk pointless in PvP, but in PvE it has some use. I tested it against my Vorpal weapon Cartesian Coordinate, which is one of the best PvE fusion rifles in the game, and Cartesian still outdamaged it, even though Controlled Burst grants more damage than Vorpal weapon does, alongside with the fact that you need to perfectly hit your shots if you don't already do, which for fusion rifles in PvE against most bosses isn't too bad. So because of this, I'd recommend considering this perk on the Techian Force if you don't already plan on doing so. The next perk for us to discuss is Discord. Discord grants your weapon faster aim down sight speed, increased accuracy, and better airborne effectiveness for a short period of time. And if you get kills with that weapon during that period of time, you increase the timer on the perk and get ammo back from thin air. This perk originally came onto my radar from a video that iFrostbolt made pairing it with the pressurized precision, as that's when the infinite ammo aspect came in for me. I tried this weapon in PvE and I didn't really find a use for it on any of the weapons that it was on, since most of the weapons that it can roll on are primary weapons, so most of the benefits are useless in PvE. But in PvP, Discord can be a disgusting perk for those that are great at PvP. In my time of testing this weapon in PvP, I found that I was able to effectively use Discord about a third to half of the time it was procced. But if you're a good PvP player, you may genuinely want to try this perk out. I'd recommend it most on the pressurized precision, as the 2 snipers it rolls on aren't great, but regardless, I'd definitely say this perk is worth it for PvP. As typical for Bungie, they need to include the god-awful perks for the season, which is what the last two perks in today's video are. The first of those two are Eddy Current, which just sounds like someone's name, and if that is your name, then I'd be upset because Bungie named you after one of the most useless perks we have seen in a while. The perk makes it so that your reload speed is increased shortly after sprinting. To proc this perk, you need to be sprinting for 3 seconds, which will then proc the perk for 3 seconds. Being amplified also boosts this perk's performance, but not by a sizable enough margin to write home about. Considering the fact that this perk finds itself in column 3, where we tend to find great perks like Rangefinder, Killing Wind, Perpetual Motion, and other great perks populating it, this perk will almost always be a last pick for most players, and for others like me, this will be a perk that will 99% of the time be dismantled. I would say this perk is not worth it at all. Now let's get into the final perk of today's video, being Invisible Hand. The way this perk works is that when you miss shots, you're granted additional stability, which disappears shortly after hitting a shot. If you are to miss again after hitting a shot, then the timer on this perk will refresh. This perk is one that I see no use in at all, as stability isn't really that big of a deal on most weapons. And even then, you typically kill a target that is causing you to miss shots or reposition into a more favorable position, so I see no use for this perk in PvE. For PvP, it's a bit of the same story. I could see why this perk may provide a use for some players, but I will say that the amount of shots you need to miss in order for this perk to actually be of use is too much to be used unironically. You need to miss roughly 4 shots, which if you miss 4 shots in an engagement using a weapon that isn't an SMG, auto rifle, or pulse rifle, then 9 times out of 10 you will lose the fight you are taking, which is why I question the use of this perk. If you find yourself missing a lot of shots in PvP, then you can consider using this perk, but I'd question other things first to see if maybe something else is the issue so that you're not wasting a perk slot on a perk that isn't going to help you that much in engagements. And because of that, I do not believe Invisible Hand is worth it. Well, that is going to wrap up this video. If you found it helpful, then consider dropping a like and subscribing to the channel for more Destiny 2 content dropping weekly. If you enjoy this format of these perk reviews, then let me know in the comments below, and if you aren't a fan of the format, then voice your concerns as well. If you'd like to see more content from me, then consider stopping by one of my streams that happen right here on YouTube, as I'd love to see you all there. Finally, follow me on my social media accounts linked below for updates on my content. With that being said, I'm SniperKH, and I'm out. Good luck with gaming.